This is the continued story of the book I Saw God's Hand by E.L. Martin, as retold to the children of the Watertown SDA Church Primary Sabbath School. I'm your storyteller, Austin Bacchus. Let's go. Okay, today's chapter is called Call of the South Seas. I chose to enroll in the Bible Workers course at the college, but events that first year compelled me to change plans. Pastor Katarangoso from the British Solomon Islands, while in Australia for a committee meeting, was invited to speak at the Friday evening Vespers at the college. Pastor Rangoso, whose skin was as black as the cover of my Bible, every inch of his 6 feet 2 inches a wonderful Christian, spoke English very well, but he always sensed his limitations. That Friday he came down with a heavy attack of malaria. He felt that by evening he would be able to preach for the meeting as long as there was an interpreter so that he would not have to speak in English. Because Pastor Rangoso had actually grown up in I believe it was in Fiji or the Solomon Islands. So his first language was not English. He wasn't used to trying to preach in English as much, and so he wanted someone to help him. Pastor G.F. Jones, an old missionary sea captain, was sent for and urgently requested to be at the college in time for the evening Vesper meeting. Pastor Jones, one of God's great men, is the only man I know of who it could be said that he possessed the gift of tongues in the sense of using actual languages. Years before, when Pastor Jones has made his way into Morovo Lagoon in the Solomon Islands as the first pioneer missionary, he spoke to those headhunters in their own language from the very moment he set foot on their soil. Can you guys imagine that? He showed up on an island where there were people who were cannibals. He had never learned their language. He had no way to learn it. And the moment that he arrived on their beach, he could talk in their language. That's an amazing miracle that God did for him. This made a tremendous impact on those headhunters, for they assumed him to be one of their departed chiefs who had come back from the dead in the form of a white man to bring them a vital message. So they were willing to listen to him because suddenly he could talk in their language, even though he was obviously not one member of their tribe because he was white, and in that island they were all very dark brown and black. When Pastor Jones arrived at the college that Friday afternoon, not knowing why he had been sent for, he was asked to interpret for Pastor Rangoso, for he used to speak Morovo during the years he worked in the Solomons. So this is that missionary sea captain who had been able to speak miraculously in the islands. They said, bring him, he can interpret for the man who had malaria and who's feeling kind of weak and doesn't want to have to try to speak in English for the meeting. But Pastor Jones humbly explained he would be unable to translate because he couldn't speak the language anymore. Since the day he left the Solomon Islands, he had not been able to speak it. So during all the time that he had lived on those islands, among those people, he had been able to speak their language. The minute he left the islands and didn't need to speak it anymore, he couldn't even remember it in his head. Well, he explained it was only as God gave him permission that he was able to speak. This caused great concern to Pastor Rangoso because he didn't feel well enough to deliver his address in English. He finally requested that Pastor Jones at least come sit with him up there on the platform. When Pastor Rangoso began to speak, whether he really meant to or not, I don't know, he began speaking in Morovo, not English. But Pastor Jones immediately jumped to his feet and whispered to Pastor Rangoso that he could understand him clearly, and he'd be able to interpret for him after all. During that meeting, Pastor Rangoso uplifted Christ and told of the thousands of his people who were going down into Christless graves, meaning that there were so many people back in his islands that Pastor Rangoso had grown up on who didn't know about Jesus yet. And a burden was placed on my heart, says Mr. Martin, that will never be erased this side of eternity. I went out under the stars alone that night, and I made a covenant with my master to go to the Solomon Islands as soon as he called me. And from that very hour, I felt destined to serve in the Solomons.
What is that picture?
This is him going out under the stars to pray to God and telling him, if you send someone to call for me to go to the Solomon Islands, I will go. And then I waited. Everyone knew of my hopes. On many occasions, students asked me, had anyone called me to go to the Solomons? They hadn't, but I was undaunted. That means he didn't give up hope. Near the end of my third college year, with 1 year short of graduation, an emergency developed at the home of my girlfriend, Alma, in the southwestern slopes of New South Wales. Someone needed to come help harvest the wheat crop because her brother Stan was in the hospital with a heart condition and wasn't expected to live. And her father was already dead, so no one else was available. I left immediately, and within a few days I was working harvesting the wheat from day till dark. Shortly after the harvest, her brother did die, and we laid him to rest. But now, during that time away from school, I had very little opportunity to earn the fees to pay for college the next year, and I didn't know what I should do. Should I stay away from college a year in order to build up my finances? Well, one day, soon after Alma's brother Stan had died, Alma's mother came to me and made an offer that would have solved all my worries. She offered me the property with the dairy herds, the sheep, the farm machinery, and a tractor, and a new house. She said Alma and I could get married and have the place together. This offer threw me into greater turmoil. What should I do? Should I spend a year trying to earn my finances and pay for going back to college, because he really wanted to be a missionary and be ready to go to the Solomon Islands? Or should I stay and take over this farm? What should I do? And what about my promise I'd made to God that I would go to the Solomon Islands as soon as he called me? Alma's mother was pressing me. Let's go. Let's have the papers drawn up. And she found it hard to understand when I asked for a couple days to think it over. Friday night, I prayed until late in the night. And early Sabbath morning, I told the Lord, I must know that day what I was going to do. God, you have to tell me, am I going to go back to college, or am I going to take over this farm? I made a full commitment to him to do whatever his will indicated. We went to church that morning, and returning home after church that afternoon, still praying silently that the Master would show me his will, I was greeted by Alma's mother telling me that a letter had come in the mail for me. She had put it on my dressing table. Breathing a prayer, I tore open the envelope, and there was a letter from the Australasian Division asking me to go to the Solomon Islands for missionary service. Just like he had been praying, he said, God, you have to give me an answer today. And God gave him the answer. I told Alma, and there on our knees, we thanked the Master for such a clear-cut answer to our prayers. It would mean years of being apart for her and I, but that wouldn't matter as long as we were doing his will. Alma's mother still found it hard to understand why I was turning down her offer of the farm. I replied immediately to the secretary of the Australasian Division. I told him I was willing to answer the call. And in reply, they informed me that I had to go as a married man. I couldn't just go by myself. Well, that was impossible. I didn't have enough money. My college bill was paid, but things were very tight right now. I barely had enough money to pay for the train fare to go to Alma's house. So I wrote back to them. I made it quite clear. I was going to just have to go alone, and then after one term of service, meaning 3 years of being out in the mission field, then I'd come back and get married. They replied that they would offer me up to 6 months of wages in advance so that I could get married now, and we could purchase whatever we needed to set up a home in the Solomon Islands. That meant we had 3 weeks to get ready for the wedding. Well, there was a mad rush of obtaining passports and documents and purchasing whatever was necessary, taking great care that the money was spent wisely, for after all, this money wasn't really ours. And at last we were on our way to the Solomon Islands. Be sure to tune in next time for more stories from the book I Saw God's Hand by E.L. Martin. And meanwhile, feel free to check out these videos as well as others on my YouTube channel with many more mission and Bible stories for kids and adults. God bless you.